If you're a business owner, odds are you spend a good part of your time looking at analytics, whether that is your website traffic, your Shopify performance, your Instagram metrics, or the dreaded abandoned cart notifications. But what happens when customers leave screens and go into devices like smart glasses and headsets? Customer behavior is no longer confined to this rectangle, and we now need analytics in 3D. What does that even look like? Is it possible? That's what we're talking about this week with Tony Bevilacqua, the founder and CEO of Cognitive3D. We wanted to have this conversation with Tony because Cognitive provides 50% of the Fortune 100 companies, including Walmart and Meta, with spatial analytics. And during our conversation, we cover everything. Tony talks about the pivot that led to the founding of Cognitive, his secret to enterprise sales, the privacy concerns and tools that we need to know about with smart glasses and headsets becoming more prevalent, and personally, my favorite thing to talk about, how you can future-proof by combining artificial intelligence and spatial computing. So whether you have an online business, you think you want to have an online business, if you're building in XR, if you sell to enterprise, or if you are just a data nerd, this episode of Becoming Dauntless is your unfair advantage. So let's get into the interview. So Tony, thank you for joining us today. If you could tell us about how you got into XR, because you've been in the industry for a hot minute. There's not too many of us that have been around since, the 2015, 2016 era, and you have about that and your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I have been in the space for over 10 years now. My first kind of introduction to the immersive space was really back in 2014. I was spending time building a mobile analytics company. And part of that was, we had quite a few game developers as our customers. So I spent time at like GDC, at E3 when that was still a thing. And there was this guy named Palmer Luckey running around showing off this thing called the DK2 back then. I was building kind of a product that already existed in the market. I was doing it with like not a lot of funding and trying to catch up on features that already existed. And so for me, I'm interested in building something that's innovative, that is the next generation of new capabilities, new features, that type of thing. And I saw this immersive technology. I did a DK2 demo. It was just substantially different. I realized that there was a real greenfield opportunity in the immersive technology space to be able to provide a higher level of visibility in terms of what people are doing and how they're interacting inside these 3D environments. So I still worked at my last startup. I bought a few dev kits. I got a couple developer friends involved and we started playing around with it. I became a bit of an evangelist and, started to explore what it would mean to collect meaningful data for the immersive technology space. And so we ended up founding Cognitive VR back then, which is now Cognitive3D, back in late 2015.
That's quite the entry point, starting with the DK2. I think my first was the Google View, but it was the one where you could put a pixel in it and flip it down. And I don't even remember now what it's called.
The Google Cardboard, and they went absolutely crazy for years, where everybody was buying those branded cardboards and putting their phones in them and stuff like that. Probably the worst possible intro that you could give somebody to VR,
and yet I'm still
potentially
here.
Set our space back a decade. But yeah.
From the analytics perspective, one of the most jarring things for me being exposed to VR for the first time was how different the data is. So most companies are going to track clicks, page views, conversion funnels, all these 2D metrics that you would use on mobile and web. You're tracking, or Cognitive3D is tracking, gaze patterns, spatial movements, object interactions. How do you educate customers on why these metrics matter?
Immersive technology offers so much capability and so much visibility into what people are doing and how they're interacting in space. And so for me, it's about helping the customer understand that we have an opportunity to have a unique value proposition that is unique to this particular platform that helps underpin why we are all here. If you're going to spend an exceptional amount of money, resources, and time to build an initiative in immersive technology, that we should provide meaningful insights that are exponentially more valuable than the status quo. And so that's typically the entry point. And then it's really about unpacking what it means to measure and what it means to demonstrate value proposition from these different applications.
You have a memorable aha moment, either for you and your team or maybe a customer, where a piece of data unlocked a different understanding about the user experience and then maybe changed the actions they took coming out of it?
Yeah. Okay. So we had a meaningful moment as a company. And so I had all of the wrong assumptions, kind of coming into Cognitive 3D. I believed that as a minimum baseline, we could just measure the way we do on mobile. We could capture a lot of the standard metrics, the taps, session time, where people navigated to in a particular application. And we started to build that way because that's my background. That's where I came from. That's where I was spending time. And we quickly realized we actually went out and did a hackathon in Whistler, and we had this concept of what if we could collect the full user experience of what somebody did and how they behaved. And we ended up doing a hackathon in Whistler and created our first rendition of a tool we called Scene Explorer. And Scene Explorer is a one-to-one after action review of what users did and how they behaved and how they moved through space, what they did with their eyes, what they did with their hands, all that type of stuff. And up until that point, about mid 2016, we were building all of the status quo metrics. We were building all of those things. We registered over 500 developers. They were super excited about using this product because they want to measure their applications. But the value proposition just wasn't there. Like, it was just a standard set of measures. It didn't offer anything unique or, innately valuable to the customers. Well, we started showing off our hack project of like what we created in Whistler, and it was really an aha moment for our customers that they could have exceptionally differentiated visualizations and capabilities to be able to understand how customers are interacting in these applications. So that was really a pivot point for the entire company where we kind of sunset everything we did. We fired all of our customers on the old product and then moved everything over to spatial analytics. And the second thing that we saw in our customer base was because the industry wasn't taking off at that particular moment in 2016, we had to make a really tough decision, which is, do we keep trying to build a freemium product, which, is kind of more of like a VR, standard method in mobile. You start on freemium and then you pay for a package and so on and so on. One of the other differentiating things that we saw is that there are big companies that had signed up for our free product. We saw like ExxonMobil in there and Accenture and a bunch of others. And we were like, what are they doing, with our product? Like, what are they doing with this capability? Why are they spending time with us? And we realized very quickly that enterprise was a very uniquely valuable area for this particular space, especially when you apply measurement, because you start getting into simulation, where you can think about completion, compliance, competency, the efficacy of a particular application, consumer research. You start thinking about like workflows, gaze patterns, how people move through space, that sort of thing. And even academic research, where it was like, there's so many starving students that are trying to do, master's degrees, PhDs in research, and they're using our product to be able to collect some of this data. So we felt we had something at that particular moment.
You've got 50% of the Fortune 100 companies as customers, plus Walmart and Meta, which are, huge, huge enterprises, as you pointed out, for a small business selling to these massive customers. What's something you learned about enterprise sales that you'd wish you'd known year one?
One of the things that we've kind of learned as we've been working with customers is not necessarily go for the big deal or, kind of the knock it out of the park the first time around. What I really want the opportunity to do is show a customer what our value proposition actually is, give them an opportunity to see it in practice with their product, their capability, even if it's a short-term license, 3-12 months, something in there, so we can show them what that art of the possible is, help them underpin their value proposition for whatever KPIs they need to collect, the ROI that they need to move, and allow them to grow their program. One of the biggest risks that we have is that analytics is typically something that you add at the very end of a project. And my perspective is you have to add it at the very beginning, right? And I'll hear a customer tell me, they'll be like, well, we only have X set number of sessions. We're testing it with a small group. We'll add it on the next rendition of the application. I'm like, if you get the opportunity to have another version of the application, if you have the opportunity to keep working on this program, right? If you're going to spend, $1 million on a prototype or something on those lines, you better have demonstrable ROI that makes sure you can actually justify the next program, the next of the work that you're doing. And so from our perspective, we've shifted our mentality from let's go after the biggest customers with the biggest programs to let's help enterprises enter the space and be successful. And sometimes that means just being the expert in the corner for them, helping them decide what the right data is, helping them figure out like how to plug it into the app and collect it, and then also providing them some expertise, because the other thing they get scared about is they'll look at the data set and they're like, this is terrifying. Like, there's so much data here. Who in my team is actually going to look at this? And it's like, well, The dashboards are meant to surface you the insights that actually matter, right? But if you're still worried, we have multiple data scientists on our team, cognitive psychologists, can kind of unpack these data science things for you and help you build that value proposition to make sure that there's a future for your program.
When I'm hiring product managers, one of my questions is always like, talk me through the analytics of a specific project. And I'm always looking for how early in the cycle they defined their metrics and how early they started building it into their features, because it separates the elite product managers from the lower level ones, because those are the ones that you don't need to tell to think about ROI, because it shows that they're thinking about it if they're putting baked in analytics into their earliest stories on a backlog. When you're looking at these data sets, is there a specific data point that you always find that surprises your customers? Is it gaze pattern? Is it moving through 3D space?
I find that every use case is a little bit different. And I think that the way to think about cognitive is more of a toolbox, right? In terms of all the different types of data that you can collect. And you have to have a bit of a meaningful mapping of how a particular data set or insight maps to, a particular outcome you're looking for in your program. If we're dealing with, dangerous situations or, interactions where the key value proposition that they're after is reduction in errors, loss of use of equipment, people, loss of material, health and safety, reduction in workers' comp, like those types of end goals, then I start to go down the path of like, okay, so how do we measure accuracy? Let's talk about, measuring like spatial behaviors and specific actions that users can take. Are they doing it accurately? Are they doing it within an appropriate amount of time? But then we'll go down the further path and saying things like, what if we leveraged eye tracking or gaze to be able to demonstrate great situational awareness and help reduce the safety aspects and be able to demonstrate to our user it's not enough to do the work, it's also about doing the work safely. If I'm talking consumer research, it's a totally different value proposition. That eye tracking that we just talked about for situational awareness, that's more about attention. That's more about branding. It's more about packaging design. Did it stop them in their tracks when they're navigating on an aisle? Where did they spend time in a store? Like those patterns, those data inputs can be used differently for every single different use case, depending on what's required. And so part of what we do is helping map that.
You alluded to this earlier with a lot of your customers. You're looking at VR training programs, and as well as we do, there's a lot of hype around VR training. You see things like 80% better retention or 4% faster completion, which to your earlier point, if it's not safer completion, then it doesn't matter that it was faster.
Yeah, exactly.
But we also see data, I'm sure you do as well, that VR adoption is still well under 30 million active users globally. Are we in a hype cycle and we're swirling in it? Or is this really the future of workplace learning?
Yeah, I'm going to be optimistic here. Like we have one of the largest VR deployments in the world. I won't say who, but I think you know who. From our perspective, like it provides a high quality capability in terms of being able to retain knowledge, being able to attain knowledge on a distributed basis, being able to assess without bias. Creates a fair and level playing field for a lot of folks. And I think as we think about AI and kind of the evolution of the workforce, as well as baby boomers and other types of folks retiring and lots of physically hard jobs that are highly technical that need to be replaced, this is a very fair and a highly aligned technology to be able to store that mind share and train the next generation of folks. So be it you have a retention problem in your business or you just want to be able to train people in a very standard way, XR is definitely a just fantastic vehicle to do so, and produces higher levels of retention than any other type of training material that we've seen, other than standing with someone and showing them with your own hands.
Ever encountered people that find this kind of data collection creepy? Because I look at something, you have, I look at it and I'm like, I want to know, how have you dealt with it, or what do you think the outcome of that kind of reaction is going to be? Yeah,
I think it's super important to be disclosed to your end users, like what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. It's also about framing as well. I mean, if we're thinking about situational awareness, we're trying to keep people safe. We want to make sure you don't cut your arm off in a machine, and we can do that better if we understand if you're doing things that are potentially dangerous. There's different types of workforces that potentially would also have issues with this, other than individuals. Unions come to mind in terms of protecting their workforce from, potential assessment or overassessment of workers and performance. So I definitely think that there's like realistic views that the enterprises themselves need to consider, both a consent framework, how data is used, how long data is kept, what it's being kept for, what's the agreement between the worker and the business. At Cognitive, there's a few things we do. We've got something called the XR Privacy Framework, and it's a consent framework that the enterprises can use. And basically what it does is it discloses data that's going to be collected from something like a Cognitive3D, why it's going to be collected, and then an opt-in or opt-out. Now, the business certainly has the capacity to say if they opt out of data collection, they can't use the training. That's fair game. But it also provides some visibility on the types of information that this particular modality is going to collect. So we didn't see anything in the market over the 10 years of building our company. So we ended up creating this standard that is basically a do not track signal for XR. And we respect that do not track signal. So if you created a browser function or a consent framework or something that is displayed inside the headset and you send a do not track signal, we will pick that up and turn off tracking. And it allows you to choose what types of data streams you might all want to collect, right? Generally, it's important that folks consider the privacy implications of collecting spatial data. I think in work, I think it can be better accepted than potentially collecting data from the public more broadly. And so I think you have to tread with caution in both areas.
Yeah, I think it's something we will hear and people will hopefully be thinking more about as wearables become more mainstream. And speaking of headsets, we are starting to see spatial computing start to pop up almost everywhere between AR glasses, AI systems. We just saw some news drop about OpenAI with their AirPod style thing that's happening. How do you see analytics evolving?
We've been thinking about augmented mixed reality since the very beginning. I think that just in the last few years, it's really become a true reality where we can actually produce some really interesting things. And we've also seen some really great like MetaQuest apps in kind of mixed reality mode where we've been able to kind of explore some of the ways that we think about that area. Just saying, circling back to privacy just for a moment, I think it's wholly unacceptable for both business and consumer to just capture video of like where a user is. I don't think anybody is going to find it acceptable that I capture your living room, or, a private space in your home or, what it is that you're doing. And so for us, it's always about the interaction with the experience in terms of how people are interacting in those environments. There may be other contextual things that you can do in augmented and mixed reality where you might start thinking about geospatial context. So developers could be thinking about like where do valuable experiences happen? Where do we see, different types of inputs? How do we place things in the world? That sort of thing. And so there's definitely like context that you can capture in augmented and mixed reality that is helpful for the developer to build a good experience. A good example is like instead of capturing someone's living room, we could white box, that there's a coffee table, in the center of the room, or something like that, and help the developer understand that in these types of scenarios, they're asking, impossible interaction or input from their customer. And so our goal, generally as an analytics company for this space is to manage the line between helping developers build experiences that are going to make them successful and make sure that the market actually happens, as well as the privacy implications that it has for the end user, and try to create a balance between the two.
We're seeing a lot more little AR assisted reality scenarios. I'm curious if you take on this, right? Where the digital objects are being overlaid. Often it's more of a display than a true hologram in the physical space, but it might clip into a wall, right? It doesn't actually have the contextual awareness. Do the analytics you are trying to capture in those contexts change?
We have limitations, right, in terms of like what we can do, and some of those limitations exist for a reason. As an example, on the MetaQuest, for example, in their mixed reality mode, they don't give you like textures of the entire space, or being able to understand like what the room looks like, but they'll tell you there's a coffee table, a chair, a lamp, or other types of things that are contextually relevant to what you're doing. If the APIs don't exist on the platforms, that's also a hard line by the hardware that you're purchasing and trusting in that manufacturer, the APIs that they extend not only to the developers, but also to companies like Cognitive3D. So we leverage what is the capabilities are, we follow the terms of service, the privacy policy that these companies offer, and then then we also have some of our own lines in terms of like what we won't do, in terms of, making these things relevant. In an experience like that, I think the insights are a little bit more limited than I would like in terms of being able to understand just a simple overlay, but, certainly measurable. Yeah.
Whenever we start thinking about things like this with the privacy angle and the what is socially acceptable and what's not, I always think of Roomba, and it's
I was thinking of my
because we had one like
My goodness.
when Roombas were new, right? And it was this like realization of, oh, now it's iRobot that owns Roomba, right? Now iRobot has the layout of one of the floors of my house. And it was, not something you thought about when you clicked add to cart, but then once you got it and you have the thing and you're dealing with it, you're like, oh, where is this data going? What on earth are they going to do with it? What if there's a data breach and now someone has the layout of my house? At the time, those were really big realizations and concerns. Now we've become a little bit more numb to it because we have so many products that are tracking spatial data.
I think that you can design products with privacy in mind. And, a good example would be like if you're going to, anchor an experience inside of a home, storing that spatial data and maybe an enclave that exists within the headset as opposed to pushing it to the cloud or, something along those lines. So I think that, part of this is like manufacturer responsibility, and then also just like the market being, and I know it's hard for consumers to kind of consider some of these things, but, choosing something that's not going to mortgage your privacy.
On-device processing and storage is one of our favorite levers to pull as developers, to be honest. Anytime we need to add a little bit more of a privacy layer or we just feel that it's the right thing to do, our challenge is the compute power necessary can sometimes become a limiting factor with the headsets that we want to use versus need to use. But agreed with you. I think the cloud is good for many things, but we as people in the XR ecosystem, especially when we're considering privacy, should not overlook on-device processing, on-device storage, because it can lend a lot more security to what we're trying to do while allowing us to deliver the experience that we want the customer to have.
I think the people that work in this space, as well as robotics, probably have a more refined view on this particular problem set and the types of things that we need to be aware of and cautious of than pretty much any other area. So I'm hoping that, we try to all stay honest about like, how these things should be designed, and that we don't get into a situation where, everything ends up in the cloud in the hands of who knows who. But another good example would just be the one that I paid attention to recently is just like DNA data, like 23andMe and all that kind of stuff. Like you sign up for a product, you use it, and then, the data goes into the cloud, and then the company experiences some sort of turbulence, and then there's some questions about where that data might end up.
One question I love asking people who come on here, Tony, so I'm going to subject you to it as well, is what is the most memorable AR or VR experience you've ever tried, and why was it so memorable?
Oh man. There's so many. It's an app called Headspace XR. It's made by the people that build the primary Headspace app. I don't know if you've ever tried this application or not before, but it's beautiful. Nexus Studios created this application and conceptualized this world of mindfulness and meditation and all these different things, and you can kind of like explore the world, and it has all these different concepts of trying to help you kind of navigate what you're feeling and your emotions and all these different types of things. And it never got a massive audience just in terms of like installs and what I've seen so far, but it's a really beautiful application and deserves some attention as well as some accolades in terms of like what they created.
I think you've motivated me to go try it because I've seen it before, but I have not tried it myself.
It's worthy of a run through. Give it a try. I think it's interesting.
That's awesome.
For sure.
Well, thank you for joining us today and for sharing everything you learned. If listeners want to hear more about what you do and what you're up to, where can they connect with you?
You can hit me up on LinkedIn. Also email Tony@Cognitive3D.com. Couple things I'll mention. Cognitive3D is totally free for developers. So if you're interested in understanding like where you stand from an application quality perspective, we've got these really great benchmarks that would allow you to understand your application and dig in. And folks that are interested in the privacy perspective, please check out the XR Privacy Framework. That's xrprivacyframework.org. It is a standard, it's open source, it's MIT. And so if you want to contribute to it, if you want to use it, if you want to respect it, like use it in your own data collection scheme in terms of, respecting its signals, definitely check it out, because that's something that we do, but we're a group of one, unfortunately, right now.
That's a great resource for the developer community. We'll definitely link to it in the notes.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And we'll be sure to link all of that in the show notes for anyone who's watching or listening. We can't wait to talk more, and we'll see you all next time.